Today I'm going to show you a couple of shortcuts to get that CVT belt out when it's worn, you need to replace it, or it broke, with rare instances. And a lot of dealers and repair shops are telling you that you might have to remove the entire engine to get this belt out. I'm here to tell you there's another way to do it half the time, and you'll have a lot of fun doing it, and it'll give you a lot of knowledge about what's going on in your vehicle. So come along with me as we take off and change the CVT belt on a HISUN Strike 250. First thing you're going to need to do is take this side panel off. Now let's go ahead and move this back here so you can get a good look at it. Now this side panel covers around the gas fill area, and it's going to go up to the front of the HISUN, about up to here. What you're going to have to do to get this off first is remove a couple of screws that are located right behind the fender area, the rear fender flare. There's one right here. And then for me, it was just easier to take the whole front fender flare off. There's only a few bolts and it's pretty easy to do. So go ahead and remove that front fender flare and then knock it out for you. The second thing we're going to do is I remove the door on this particular unit. It's just going to make getting in here a lot easier. It's going to make you watching here a little bit easier. There's a few screws here from the factory that you can remove on the outside, and it'll come right off. If it's stubborn, just give it some time, it'll come off. Now I've elected to replace all my factory ones with stainless steel 8mm heads with 6mm by 1 bolts, as you can see here. It makes, for me, servicing a whole lot easier later on, instead of the Phillips that tend to strip out and collect mud and debris inside of it, and it's just hard to get the screwdriver in there. So I've replaced all the bolts I could, even the fender bolts here, all along the edges here. With the original Allens, I've replaced them with 6mm, but the heads are 8mm. And you can get them online in a box of 50 or 100. They're pretty cheap. So let's move on. So one, we remove the door, gain access to it pretty easy. Let's set that aside. Two, you're going to find that I've removed a lot of the bolts ahead of time just for the simplicity of the video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove this side panel here. And I'll back this up a little bit so you can get a better look. So I'm going to remove the side panel. I need to gain access to the fuel tank, and this is the easiest way to do it. So there's 3 bolts underneath here. So there's 3 bolts, or screws I should say, underneath, and I've replaced them again with bolts. So take those off, loosen all the bolts. There's some Phillips on the inside, 3 of them. Little small plastic Phillips. They go into plastic, but they're metal. Go ahead and remove those 2. Now once you're ready to move this off, you're going to take the fuel cap off first. Now, make sure to check that you've not lost your rubber gasket. This could cause fuel leaks later on if it's not in there, and it could be a safety hazard. So let's just keep an eye and make sure that that's in there, in place. And the next step is remove this plastic. Again, I've removed everything, all the nuts and bolts ahead of time to make it easier for you to understand. So we're just going to take this side off, which is the right side. Voila! We set that aside. Now we get a little bit more access into here, what's going on. So the next course of action is, of course, I got to remove the seat. Now that simply slides forward. There's a release here, and the seat shall slide forward and come right out. Again, I've already removed it for ease. Boom, seat's out. All right. Now we're getting on to some technical stuff here, so I'm going to move the camera a little bit closer for you. What's next is that there's a seat rail mechanism, a latch. Now it's normally held in by 4 Allens. I've again removed it ahead of time just to show you what needs to come off. And there's 1 per each side, 1 driver side, 1 passenger side. So let's get these out of the way. And remember which bolts go in where. There's 2 long ones for the front and 2 short ones for the rear. There's a difference on the deck thickness on that retainer for the seat retainer bracket. So just keep that in mind. Now, here's the tricky part. There is a center console cover here that covers the engine. It's held in with 2 little screws. It just pops right out. This is what it looks like right here. So you want to move these so that the little tab faces the same way as this. So get a close-up view. So you can see when these are straight, then you know that the bottom ones are aligned. And that usually sits right around here. So you can take that off so you can gain access to it. The next step is the tricky step, and that's the hardest step of all. So what I've done here, This lower bracket is normally one piece from the factory. I found that to just be very hard to service and maneuver to get in and out of here, and to take it off all the time. What I've done to shorten my steps, and I'm not encouraging you to do this, and you can leave it alone, that's fine, but I've actually made a small slit right inside here. Now what that allows me to do is, once I remove the 2 bolts down here, and then there's 2 bolts up here, it allows me to gain access to this one side at a time. So the other side actually still, it's a battery tray. And to go through and just disconnect all those wires, if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty straightforward, but you know what, it doesn't hurt to find an easier method to do something. The straightest route is always from A to B. So let's just make that work. So by having this side off, I can always just service this side if I want to. I can get to the belt if I want to. And it doesn't disturb any of the electronic harnesses once, and that stays in place. If you'll notice, once I get this off here, putting it out of the way for safety. On this side, I've left it all inside the battery tray compartment. Now if you notice underneath there's all your electronics. There's your battery, there's the ECM, there's also a fuse relay box, which is right in here. There's 4 little screws on top of here, and there's little screws and relays. The one that says Delphi, that's your ECM. Don't play with that. It'll ruin your day. Your battery's in there. I've elected to go with a lithium-ion battery, but you want to keep mine with lithium-ion. That's gray battery. For me, it's worked very well, but there's also special chargers for lithium-ion batteries. You just don't want to use any charger for it. Follow the manufacturer's instructions on all these, and you'll be fine. So once we've gotten that piece out of the way, on a little side note too, you might have to loosen or remove the seat belt anchors. There's one here and one right here. Now I've elected to upgrade to a race certified 4-point harness instead of the factory one. This is a 2015 model. It came with a 4-point harness that tended to get rough, is the easy word to put it, when it got dirty and wet. It was hard to adjust between different sized kids and adults inside here. So I went with a great race prepared unit, which in all honesty you can spend $100-200 and have an amazing setup. And it doesn't hurt to match the color of your rig. So upgrade if you can, get better seat belts in there. You know, your safety is what's most important. This is just a piece of metal and plastic. Alright, so now that we've got this tray package out of the way, and we've got the seat adjuster out of the way, so the next thing is we have a fuel tank down here. So you're saying, well, how am I going to get to this part, which is the CVT cover? You cannot remove this without either taking the engine out or removing the fuel tank. So I got a little trick for you. So the first thing you're going to do, there's a cross member that goes from one side to the other, and it's also part of your seatbelt anchor. There's 2 bolts right here. There's 2 on the other side. And you notice it's loose now. I don't have to take it completely out. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. Again, this is all about saving time doing it the right way as well. So I'm just loosening that. I'm taking those bolts off and those bolts off so I can have some play. I'm going to need that. Now we have the fuel tank. So now let's take a step here and look at this. So the fuel tank has a little quick release clip on here. So easiest way I found to get inside and out of here, to get the fuel tank out, you very carefully take this little clip off. Of course I could have used a smaller screwdriver. And you'll notice it's simply just a little clip. Stainless steel, spring retention. It holds a fuel line onto this is your fuel pump assembly and also the fuel level sending unit. So I'm going to set this off to the side so we don't lose it. Now, you also have your fuel overflow or drain or vent tube. You want to take that out gently. The original one of mine broke, and so I installed an aftermarket one that's used a lot in race vehicles and so forth. It's a overflow spill block off valve basically. But it's just a little ball bearing, so if it goes upside down, it stops the fuel from coming out. So next, when I have the fuel line, I'm going to take it off the fuel pump assembly. So first I'm going to rotate it, because it's got a little O-ring in there if you want to kind of break that seal. So once I've got that done, I'm simply going to pull it up slowly, get it out of the way. Now keep in mind there's a little O-ring inside of here Okay, and there's also one down on the bottom inside of the fuel cap. Make sure they're both in there. They should be brown, and get them out. Now you can see mine's out of the way now. It's easy to move it. Now the next step is there's two plugs for the fuel pump and fuel sending unit. If you'll notice, one of them is color coded, green to green, black to black, and the other one has a pink and red and a white and black. Now these are interchangeable, so be careful, because one is your sending unit, one's your fuel pump. So if you want to tape them or zip tie one so you know and remember which one it is, that's fine. I know that this green goes to this green, so I'm good. I've already checked my wiring harness. So I simply press down on the tab and it comes apart. Same thing with the other one. Comes right apart. Ta-da. Alright. The next step, pretty easy one. There's only two bolts that hold the whole fuel tank in. So I'm going to show you those very quick like. One will go right here. Whoops. So there's one that's right here. You want to remove that one. And then there's one right back here. You'll see it on the very back of the fuel tank. It goes to the very back by the frame. Now it's got a little collar, and sometimes that collar will come out and sometimes it won't. So just pay attention when you pull that out there. You want to make sure you get everything and keep the nuts and bolts in orderly fashion. And so now once these two bolts are removed, the fuel pump and the sending unit, the vent tube is removed. Before I move anything, some people might have a little bit of fuel left in the fuel tank. So I'm going to take the fuel cap, and remember that piece of O-ring that's in the rubber seal. So I'm going to put it back in so I don't spill any fuel. Now the next step is simply, with this loose, it's actually pretty easy. And I'm going to pull the camera back so you can get a better idea of what I do and how I pull this thing out of here. So I'm basically going to just pull this up, maneuver it a little bit, and it comes right out of the way. I can simply send it off to the side. Now I have full access to my CVT belt. I have not taken the engine out, messed with any of the electronics, the harness, the motor mounts, the chain adjustment, none of that. It's all still secured. So now we have access. Look at that. Ta-da! All this spare room inside of here. Not a bad time to look around here. Now these are the lower panels underneath the vehicle that you can remove just by a few screws. Again, I've changed those to bolts to make it a little easier. This is the screw-on oil filter, in case those who want to know where it is. You just access it underneath by removing this skid plate underneath the plastic skid plate, and you can have access to this. It's also easy now to take a look at anything. If there's anything you need to do, maybe adjust the throttle cable, make sure you're getting the full throw out of here on your throttle body. Make sure there's no pinched lines that came from the factory or shipping. Not a bad time to change your spark plug if you haven't done it for a couple of bucks. That's really cheap insurance. So the next step, we're going to remove this CVT cover, and I'll be right with you. Ready to remove the CVT, which is the transmission belt, basically the same thing you would find on some of the other aftermarket vehicles, but they're a lot easier to get to. This one unfortunately is a little harder to get to, but it doesn't tend to wear out and break very often, so the chances and the odds of you getting in here, it's going to happen sometime, but it's not going to happen all the time, which is great. So you're going to need a 10mm wrench, that's it, and there's going to be a bunch of these screws that are right around the edges. Now I'm going to point to some of these. Now what the screws look like are basically these right here. Now I've gone ahead and removed all the screws except for one just to show you what's going on. There's also a little rubber tube that connects the air vent from the CVT cover, and I've had that off so I can show it to you right here. I'll be cleaning all these prior to be putting them back on. So here's the seal that goes right here. Just a Phillips screwdriver, take it right off. You can maneuver it out of the way. And you're going to go around here and you're going to look for all the little screws. And again, I have removed all of them except for one just to show you how it comes off. And so again, they're normally held in by bolts. So now I'm going to take this cover, and if I feed it back here, it comes off fairly easy. So what you're going to find is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts that hold this cover on. Now is also time to look inside inspection wise and make sure there's no debris in here. No used belt if your belt had broke. There's a piece of string. My belt had broken once. So you want to remove all this debris as much as possible. And you can take this little cover off with 4 screws if you need to, which I'll probably do prior to me putting this back together, just to ensure it's all clean inside of here. So this is the cover. Now on the outside of the cover you'll have what they call a belt sensor. I want to put it. It's a plastic plug. Now normally there's a tab on here, but because my belt broke, it whipped down and ripped it off. What it goes in there, and normally it'll sit here and you can turn it and you can feel if there's tension on the belt. The easiest way I found out when my belt broke is that I simply removed this tube when I was out in the desert, and I was able just to, with the engine off, put my hands in here with a flashlight, and I could actually see the belt was broken. So, but you want to keep this on here, keep sand and debris out of here, so even if that little tip breaks off, keep it in there. It's good for you. Alright, well here we go. Here's our CVT clutch. It's not the biggest thing on the market, but you know what? It works pretty darn well. Now this belt I've already replaced, but I'm going to show you how to replace it per the manual. And so let's take our next step. Our next step is we're going to take 2 of the screws we used to take the cover off. And on this side here, on the back half of the clutch, there's some screw holes that are 6 millimeter. So you're going to want to put those in there. There we go. And then there's another one here. Just like that. Not very hard, huh? I'm going to bring the camera in a little bit closer so you can see really what's going on. I got in my 10 millimeters little ratchet screw or socket here, wrench it. So I'm going to tighten this down. You want to do one, then you want to come back and do the other one. Applying equal pressure to both sides. And you'll notice already that the belt is getting very loose. So, oops. What that's doing is taking the 2 what they're called sheaves and it's spreading them apart. So it's allowing that belt to slide down there. And again, I'm going to do the back one. Sometimes a little faster just to start it by hand before you get to wrench it on there. And you'll feel tension on it when it's all the way down and ready to go. There we go. Let's see if I can't do it by now. So the way the book tells you to do it, you're basically gonna. There's not a lot of room here. I'm gonna give you that right off the bat. That's what makes it really hard for me to pull this off, because it tells you that you should be able to slide this off. You'll notice I had a little bit of problem doing that. So I'm going to show you another way I did it, and also because I want to clean it. Now because that's so tight and the tolerances are so hard to get into, it's really hard to change that belt. So let me show you something else real quick. What I've done, I've got the old trusty impact here, and it just makes it a whole lot easier to get out. On the end of it you'll see a 19 millimeter socket. Now for me to get inside there, the easiest way for me to do it, I use a stubby. Instead of a long one, I use a short one. And I'm going to reach right inside there. And I'm going to put it right on this forward nut. Now you'll see. So watch when I just take it off. Piece of cake. So I'm going to take this nut off here. There's a little washer. Make sure you retain that in the nut. And then the forward clutch should come off. Now I've noticed sometimes there's a little bit of drag on here, or it binds up a little bit, and it might be kind of hard to get off. So be very gently. This is aluminum here. Maybe a rubber mallet, just kind of tap it, and then you'll see it actually come loose. And in the other video I'm going to show you what's behind here. It's basically your clutch assembly, just like a standard CVT clutch. Now one of the things you want to do, and one of the things I did to remove this, is I'm going to look at what they call the sheave face. And you notice there's a little bit of belt debris on here. We'll get to cleaning up that sheave here in just a second, but let's go ahead and take the belt off so we can get it inspected. So now it comes out pretty easy. And there's our little belt. Nothing to it, right? Now, one of the things you want to remember is that the belt typically wants to go in one way and one way only. So you want to put it back the same way you took it off. Now, this one happens to show the writing which faces towards me. So when I put this back on the vehicle, I want to put it back on the same way. I'm going to have this facing me, and it's always going to rotate that way. Okay? So now is the time for me to look at the second sheave, which is located back down here. So there's a spreader washer, which can only go back on one way. There's teeth on this side and a big opening on this side, so you can't really put it on backwards. Let's put that off to the side. Boom. The second part of that clutch sheave. Now again, I'm going to want to look at the surface for any ruts, any grooves, anything that damaged it when the prior belt was broken, to make sure that there's no problems on it, and that's what the backside looks like. So everything looks pretty good on this one, but like I said, we're going to clean it off before I actually assemble this thing. This video is just for you to show you how to change the clutch. So inside of this other one, it's going to be a little hard to remove the back clutch assembly. The reason being is that it gets in the way of where the swinger mount bolt is. So you can get in there with a 3M Scotch-Brite pad. I want you to wipe it down real clean, and then make sure the surface is smooth. Nothing aggressive. You don't want to scour it. You're just trying to clean it. So I can get in there and rotate it and clean it. So again, I'm going to put the clutch back on, and if there's any debris in here, I'm going to blow it out at this time with compressed air, or wipe it down and clean it out. So I'm going to put this back sheave back on, making sure it goes on the teeth. I'm going to put my spacer right here. And now for me, this is the best time to put the belt on. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So, let's put the belt on the back part first. And then assemble the clutch back together in the reverse order. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that you want to keep that loose on that side, because there's little grooves and they have to line up with that first part of that clutch. So you want to get the grooves lined up inside of here. Once that's done, I can put this back in here, the washer. Now there are factory torque specs that tell you how tight to get this bolt, or this nut, excuse me. But usually a couple zips on the impact is definitely going to get it good for me. But right now, again, I'm just here to show you how to do the belt, so I'm not going to tighten anything up too bad for you. So I'm going to reverse these two bolts now. And this is going to bring those two rear sheaves back together so we can seat the belt properly. And now what you're going to want to do is spin this, rotate it so you can seat the belt. Now you'll find that one way is trying to turn the crank, and so that's actually working against your compression. But you can actually rotate it the other way. So what I'm trying to do is get the belt to ride back up on the top, on the back side, and it'll center itself on the front. So that's how you change your belt. And you can just do you can do the other items in the reverse order. You're going to put the cover on. Now when you do that cover, one thing I wanted to show you, and I forgot to mention, is that there is a gasket for the CVT cover. It's a rubber gasket, but it's reusable, so make sure that that goes back on. That's going to seal up all the dust and debris, and make sure that nothing gets in there when you're out in the sand or dirt and stuff like that. So let's always make sure that that gasket goes back on prior to you installing this cover back on here. And if there's any questions, feel free to tag me, and I'll be more than happy to answer them as best I can. So there's your belt, and there's half the time on doing it from your engine. Have a good day.